In a world full of mysteries and exciting stories, the case of Frank Fritz and the sudden death of Mike Wolfe has become one of the most shocking ones. Fans will always remember the two close friends who built a famous TV empire together on the show American Pickers. But when the secrets behind Frank's disappearance and Mike's death started to come out, everything we thought we knew about friendship, loyalty, and fame fell apart. This isn't just an ordinary case. As we look into the death of a man, we see how fame, money, and power can cast dark shadows. If you want to keep finding the untold mysteries and getting to the bottom of this case, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. This story is far from over. In fact, it might just be the start of a nightmare-filled journey. Join us as we continue to peel back the layers of this mystery, because sometimes the truth is the more the investigation went on, the stranger the details became. The medical records didn't match the evidence found at the scene, and some accounts showed that Frank wasn't just worried about his health. He was also living in fear. He had told a friend that he felt like he was being watched, and on another occasion, he talked about how people were trying to silence him. At first, everyone thought it was just a sign of his long-term depression and anxiety. But after the autopsy, it became clear that Frank wasn't. When they found poison in his blood, everything changed. Mike Wolfe, who at first seemed very sad about Frank's death, went on TV looking shocked and choked up. But careful investigators started to notice problems with his story. His timeline was off, and there were strange financial transactions that raised red flags. Suddenly, clues started to fall into place like pieces of a scary jigsaw puzzle. An odd money transfer, a security camera that wasn't working the night Frank was found unconscious, and a strange DNA sample was found in the victim's home, and police started to look into the real nature of relationship between the two men. Even though they were close friends and co-stars on TV, things were very different off camera. There were fights and unresolvable differences, and Frank felt abandoned and replaced, and he became more suspicious of Mike's loyalty. Mike, on the other hand, knew that Frank could come back and take his old job. The trial went on for weeks. People who knew both men gave chilling evidence and shocking testimonies. Finally, the verdict was given, but before justice could be fully done, Mike Wolfe, who had become famous, fell from grace and took all of his unfinished secrets with him to the grave. The question still stands, was this really the end, or was this just the tip of the iceberg in the world of television, where friendship, fame, and betrayal are dangerously intertwined? When news of Frank's sudden death at home broke, people were shocked and deeply saddened. Frank was remembered as the heart of the show, a rough around the edges but lovable man who was the perfect contrast to Mike Wolfe's smooth and charming personality. But just 6 weeks after Frank's funeral, a quiet investigation began in Iowa. It started with a small question. An alert medical examiner noticed something was wrong with the autopsy report. Frank had a lethal level of fentanyl in his system. At first glance, this didn't seem strange. Fentanyl is a strong painkiller prescribed for severe pain after a stroke, but Frank didn't have a prescription and had never used the drug. According to those closest to him, he was actually terrified of it and he had never touched it. That substance would not have been in his body unless someone had put it there on purpose. The police called the DEA and the FBI, and what was first thought to be a natural death quickly turned into a full-on criminal case. They looked through phones and GPS records. People kept bringing up the name Mike Wolfe in deleted emails and text messages. To the public, Mike was a charming man, a creative businessman who had made antique hunting an art form, but deep down, he was a man obsessed with control, power, and most of all, complete ownership of the show's legacy. After Frank left, Mike not only kept his true intentions hidden, but he also started to make quiet, calculated moves. He filed a trademark for the name Frank just weeks after Frank's death, and he secretly approached a third party to buy the show's legacy. Frank's shares in the company, as if the death were a chance to take over the whole brand. Then there was the undeniable proof. A neighbor's doorbell camera caught Mike near Frank's house on the very night that prosecutors thought the fatal dose of fentanyl was given. No one wanted to believe it. How could it have been Mike Wolfe, the actor who had played Frank's brother on TV for decades, the couple who seemed to be inseparable? But proof doesn't lie, and Mike Wolfe's TV charm when the trial started. It was like a dark, suspenseful reality TV show that everyone couldn't turn away from. The whole country watched every detail, every testimony, and every lie being sifted out to reveal a horrifying and painful truth. Mike Wolfe wasn't just accused of betraying Frank Fritz, the man he had once called his confidant and travel partner. He was also charged with coldly and deliberately poisoning his best friend to take all the fame, the legacy, and the whole brand they had. Mike's sudden death happened just as the justice system was closing in on the law enforcement agency that was responsible for him. It was a tragic end to one of the darkest chapters in reality TV history, but the story doesn't end there. Before the trial and before the death, there had been a friendship and partnership built over time through dusty trips between crumbling barns and spiderwebbed garages. What broke that seemingly unbreakable bond? What could have made Mike Wolfe who he was? To understand what caused this tragedy, we have to go back to the beginning, the early days of American Pickers, when two friends with similar interests and a desire to tell a truly American story ruled the airwaves. That was the golden age of reality TV, before it was tainted by scripted dating shows and sensational dramas. Mike Wolfe had a vision that wasn't flashy or pretentious, but very real and undeniable. He wasn't a producer, an actor, or someone he didn't have the support of a media empire, but he did have a strong desire to find lost treasures. Mike had been a true scavenger since he was a child. He would go through small towns and knock on doors, asking people if they had anything to sell. Sometimes they would have real treasure, but more often they would have junk, broken items, or things of little value. That didn't stop him. He dreamed of a show that would capture the thrill of the treasure hunt and the excitement of negotiating for each item. Finding lost treasures and the strong bond between an object and its former owner made the show more than just about antiques. It was a journey through memories. Then Frank Fritz came along. Frank was very different from Mike in many ways. Mike was outgoing, positive, charismatic, and full of energy, while Frank was calmer, more reserved, and humble. He was a hands-on guy who loved old toys, oil cans, and war, not billboards, and he didn't care about how he looked. He was deeply interested in the small details that were hidden. He thought that real value was often hidden, which is what drew him in. They had known each other since high school, but as they got older, life took them in different directions. Mike became a full-time picker and traveled across the U.S., while Frank worked as a firefighter and safety inspector for many years before deciding to become an antiques dealer. When Mike started looking for a reliable partner to help him make his dream come true, Frank stepped in. Frank was the best choice not because they were alike, but because they complemented each other so well. In 2009, after years of pushing the idea, Mike Wolfe finally got permission from the History Channel to make American Pickers. The show seemed simple at first. Two men in a truck driving down the back roads of America looking for lost treasures. But Mike and Frank's unique combination and their storytelling made it a hit right from the start. Record-breaking numbers of people watched American Pickers. They liked the show because it was about antiques and because of the natural chemistry between the two hosts, Mike and Frank. Mike's skill at negotiating and Frank's knowledge and expertise in collecting made the show feel more real and approachable than ever. But the most interesting thing about the show wasn't the items, it was the people. Each episode was an emotional journey where viewers met elderly people. There were couples talking proudly about family heirlooms and quirky collectors happily opening up about their private lives. It was a place where memories were kept alive in every nook and cranny of dusty barns and garages, full of laughter, tears, and memories brought back to life after decades. American pickers never made fun of or made fun of these people. Instead, the show treated them with deep respect, which became its unmistakable trademark and touched the hearts of millions of viewers over the years as it gained more. The show and its creators, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz, became famous overnight. They were seen at everything from big events to crowded autograph signings. Fans of the show would travel long distances to visit Mike's antique stores in Iowa and Nashville. But as is often the case in the glamorous world of reality TV, fame came with a price. Mike and Frank's once unbreakable partnership began to change as fame opened up new opportunities but also created gaps that were hard to bridge. Over time, Mike Wolfe became the face of the brand. He became more comfortable in front of the camera, did more interviews, expanded his business ventures, and wrote more about his personal brand. Behind the scenes, Mike took charge. He became the executive producer, overseeing all brand, building deals, leading negotiations, and controlling much of the show's content. Over time, the line between partner and boss began to blur. On TV, Frank was still shown as an equal partner, but things were different behind the scenes. No longer balanced, people who worked closely with them said the problems had been going on for years. Frank felt more and more abandoned, his ideas weren't being heard, his contributions weren't being recognized, and his sense of being undervalued grew stronger, according to former crew members. Mike started to act like the show was his own property instead of the work of the whole team. The imbalance wasn't just an issue of ego. Mike owned the antiques business and controlled the production. The company and Mike had the final say on creative decisions. Wall's partners wrote that once this burden was lifted, they could clearly grow without delay and without looking back. Another email shown to the court showed plans for launching a new independent brand called Mike Wolfe, with a launch date set just 3 weeks after Frank's death. These details made it clear to the jury what Wolfe's real intentions were, especially the location data that showed Wolfe's custom black Mercedes. The Sprinter van was near Frank's house from 136A M to 146A M. On the night of the incident, which is only a 10-minute window, the prosecution said that when Wolfe gave Frank the lethal dose, the emotional tension had reached a boiling point. When they called Frank's sister Marianne Fritz to the stand, her voice was soft but firm as she talked about how Frank had fallen apart since being fired from the show and how his physical and mental health were both in crisis. He would often tell her that Mike didn't care, that his longtime partner just wanted him to disappear from his life. The next shocking thing was when the defense showed a handwritten letter found on Frank's desk in which Frank said he was afraid that Mike was following him and that if anything happened, it wouldn't be an accident. The next witness, Elaine Temple, really shocked the courtroom. Frank's neighbor took the stand and looked tense as she said she couldn't sleep the night of the incident because she saw a van out her window. A man she recognized from a TV show walked out of the house and silently made his way to Frank's side door. He didn't knock, but stood there for a moment before walking around to the back of the house. When shown a lineup photo, Elaine pointed to Mike Wolfe and said she thought it was him, though she wasn't sure. The man moved with the same posture and attitude she had seen countless times on TV. The defense tried to discredit Elaine's testimony by questioning the lighting that night and the man even though she wasn't sure about her memory. The pieces were slowly coming together to paint a dark and scary picture. The most emotional moment for the defense was when Mike Wolfe took the stand. His lawyer knew it was a risky move, but Mike was determined to go through with it. He slowly walked up to the witness stand, not the confident TV host that America used to know. At first, his voice shook, but he became calm. "We were like brothers," he said. "Fame changes people and money changes relationships. I may not have handled things well, but I never meant to hurt Frank." He said that the texts found on his personal phone were sent when he was angry and stressed out at work, which made him lose control. "I said things I regret, but that doesn't mean I killed him. I miss Frank every day. We fought, but I swear I would never hurt him. I couldn't live with myself if I did that," he said. The jury thought the evidence against Mike Wolfe was too strong and consistent. After weeks of arguments in a stuffy courtroom where time seemed to stand still, all eyes were on Mike Wolfe, the man who used to be a national TV star but was now standing still like a statue, the cold light casting shadows on his pale face. Then the judge's deep, authoritative voice broke the tension in the room. "Defendant Michael Wolfe is found guilty." Everyone let out a gasp and a chill ran down their spines. All eyes were on Mike Wolfe, hoping to see some kind of reaction, like regret or anger. But he stood there, his eyes empty and staring straight ahead. After what seemed like an eternity, he blinked slowly and heavily, as if trying to process an unbearable truth. Then he collapsed, showing complete helplessness as his knees gave way and his huge body fell to the cold stone floor. Before anyone could react, the first horrified scream rang out as Mike Wolfe lay there, arms outstretched, his face down and his graying hair falling out. For a split second, the courtroom slowed down as if time had stopped. Then chaos broke out, with chairs slamming into each other and heavy footsteps filling the air with fear. The medical staff rushed in, kneeling next to him and starting chest compressions, doing everything they could to save the man who had just been found guilty. An oxygen mask was quickly put over his pale face as worried questions rang through the room. "What's the pulse? What's the blood pressure? Call an ambulance." But in the midst of the chaos, a grim truth began to emerge. Emerged the man who was once seen as a symbol of finding and reviving lost treasures, and who had built a television empire from piles of old junk, was now nothing more than a tragic relic and a living example of how greed and cruelty can destroy everything. Mike Wolfe died in the courtroom just as the verdict was read. News of his sudden and dramatic death spread like wildfire, leaving the world in shock. How could a story that was once seen as a shocking rumor become such a cruel and tragic reality? How could a beloved TV show people saw a tragic example of the terrible price of fame, money, and power when pushed to their limits in Mike's death, which was not just the end of a person, but also the collapse of the image of a beloved icon in the hearts of viewers? The Frank Fritz case felt like a punch to the trust of the whole world, since the killer was not a stranger but a close friend of the victim who had traveled with him and called him brother. He died just as the truth came out, as if the verdict were the final blow. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The man who had once been a symbol of the journey to find lost treasures had become a monument to his own foolish ambition and the bad decisions he had made. But is that the end, or are there still secrets behind closed doors and dark corners that have yet to be revealed? The truth could be more shocking than anything we've ever heard. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell if you want to learn more about the mysteries surrounding Mike Wolfe's death and the Frank Fritz case. Sometimes the truth isn't just the end of a nightmare, it's the start of a new one. If you think there are still a lot of unanswered questions in this story, join us as we continue our search for the truth. Every little detail could change the whole picture and reveal new information that was hidden like the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest news on this case. The story isn't over yet, and every new piece of information could change how you think about what really happened. Loyal viewers started to notice a clear change. Frank seemed more distant, his screen time decreased, he didn't show up in promotional campaigns or interviews as often, and rumors started to spread that he might be having health problems. Others talked about tensions within the group. The show never officially addressed the issue, but social media couldn't stop talking about it. Then it was confirmed that Frank would not be returning. The official reason was that he needed time to recover from back surgery, which was meant to avoid making any specific promises. What shocked fans wasn't Frank's departure itself, but Mike's reaction. Many were expecting a heartfelt tribute to his partner of over a decade, but all they got was a short post on Instagram, as if Frank were just another replaceable part in a machine. The show went on without Frank. A new co-host was added, viewership went down, but the antique archaeology brand kept growing. Merchandise still sold well, and Mike Wolfe kept doing interviews as if nothing had changed, and Frank Fritz disappeared from public view. But behind the scenes, things were anything but peaceful. Close friends say he struggled because he felt not only abandoned by the show, but also by Mike, a friend he had been close with for years. Frank thought he deserved better because he was not only the co-host but also a co-founder of American Pickers. He had helped build a loyal fan base and brought his personality to the show, but now he had been quietly and bitterly thrown out. The shock sent Frank into a downward spiral. He started drinking again, stopped going to public events, gained weight, and became more and more depressed. His depression got worse, and he eventually had a stroke. This was the start of his tragic fall. What really happened between Frank and Mike is still a mystery. Some say it was over egos, others say it was money, and still others say there was a deeper betrayal that viewers never saw on screen. Whatever the reason, the friendship that used to be the basis of American Pickers fell apart. Frank's death should have been a wake-up call, a moment of gratitude, and people were shocked by Mike Wolfe's actions, or rather his silence. He didn't go to the funeral, post a tribute, or share any emotional notes in the days after his old friend's death. He was just a strange calm in the storm of suspicion. What the public didn't know was that behind the scenes, a quiet investigation was going on. Reports of toxins showed that Frank had a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system, which is a dangerous drug, and he didn't have a valid prescription. Questions started to be asked. Find out who gave Frank the drugs, who stood to gain from his death, and what Mike Wolfe was doing near Frank's house the night before he was found unconscious. Fame can be very alluring, but it can also be a double-edged sword. For Mike and Frank, it was like being on an out-of-control roller coaster that was loud, violent, and impossible to stop. As American Pickers became a hit and the business behind it turned into a huge money-making industry, everything started to change. The show's simplicity started to fade. Was it exciting to find a 1930s motorcycle under a dusty tarp in rural Tennessee? Finding an old oil sign in a rundown barn wasn't exciting anymore. Everything was about making money, licensing deals, and the power behind the scenes. In this world of calculations, Mike Wolfe became a successful businessman, while Frank, who had been his close friend, slowly faded into obscurity as the whirlwind he had helped create grew. Mike Wolfe quietly strengthened his position of power by hiring a step-by-step. Mike started trademarking exclusive phrases related to the American Picker brand and the antiques business. He also worked on many side projects, ranging from merchandise to media rights, building a tight-knit network of brands that worked like a corporation. Frank Fritz, on the other hand, had a very different dream. He just wanted to be on TV, chat with fans, and enjoy the thrill of finding soulful antiques. Two of Frank's close friends are in charge of Mike's empire. Reported that the tone of his relationship with Mike had changed a lot since season 6. A crew member remembered an incident that happened in Alabama during season 8 when they went to film at an antique car lot owned by a Korean War veteran. Frank had a heartfelt and moving conversation with the elderly man about his love of collecting memorabilia from the gas station. It was a rare, warm, and emotional moment on TV, but when the episode aired, the whole scene was cut and replaced with scenes of Mike negotiating prices, and when they talked about how the antiques could be sold again, Frank was angry because he felt like he was taken out of the story and his own moment. Insiders say Frank wasn't the only one who felt this way. Other crew members, including shop owners, experts, and pickers, had their scenes cut unless they helped Mike Wolfe's image. Over time, Mike seemed to want to be the hero of every episode, and his control spread to the scripts, social media, and even the phrases themselves. He hired personal advisors to shape his public image and made sure that all merchandise sales went to his LLC. The network no longer controlled Mike's social media accounts. Instead, they were managed by his own team. Any interview had to be approved by his representatives first. A former executive who worked on the show during the early seasons said that Mike knew how to use his fame as a weapon. He knew the network needed him and wasn't afraid to threaten to leave if they didn't get what they wanted. The press always smiled, but Mike was a bulldozer behind closed doors. Frank saw it all and started to show his frustration during filming. He would sometimes walk off in the middle of heated arguments, and there were times he wouldn't promote new episodes because he didn't like how he was portrayed. Frank thought Mike was being marketed as the only star while he, who had helped build the show, was being demoted to a supporting role. While Mike was busy building his personal empire, Frank often drove alone. Mike bought properties in Tennessee and Iowa to expand his old school. The production team quickly noticed that the spontaneous laughter between Mike and Frank had disappeared, replaced by forced interactions scripted in front of the camera. The two rarely spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. The truck that used to be full of laughter and small-town stories had become a silent ride. Archaeological digs and turned them into tourist attractions. People waited in line for hours to see his office or take pictures with his famous truck. As the seasons went on, Mike Wolfe became more than just the host of the show. He became a brand. He started working on solo projects, and according to a former network executive, there were even talks inside the company about giving him a whole new show without Frank. When asked about the rumors, Wolfe denied them. Multiple sources say that what hurt Frank the most wasn't just the difference in fame, but Mike's silence. Mike made decisions without Frank's knowledge, changed the scripts without his permission, and called meetings without warning. All of this made Frank feel more and more invisible, like his voice didn't matter anymore. The show had once been a shared vision, but now there was only one leader. Then there were the health problems. Years of Frank's health had been affected by his unhealthy lifestyle and constant travel. He was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory bowel disease that made it hard for him to move around. He also started having severe back pain and had to have surgery. When Frank took a break from filming, everyone thought it was only temporary and that he would recover and return, but that never happened. The network only said that Frank was on medical leave. Fans sent him thousands of wishes, and rumors of his return came out every few weeks. But behind the scenes, Frank didn't get a single call, and his name wasn't even brought up in meetings. When he tried to get in touch with the producers, he got vague, evasive answers. Then, one day, it was decided that he was gone. Frank's name was taken off of promotional materials, and his face was replaced by that of a new co-host. The show went on, and he was left behind, surrounded by the wreckage of a friendship that had seemed impossible to break. In an emotional interview, he said that he and Mike Wolfe hadn't talked in 2 years while he was recovering. What hurt him the most wasn't the physical pain, but the cold indifference from his friend. Frank said, "I didn't leave the show. They left me." That simple but painful statement sent shock waves through the fan community. How could two men who were once inseparable and brought American pickers to the hearts of viewers for over a decade part ways in such a cold and distant way? Why has Mike Wolfe never said anything about it in public? Talked about Frank Fritz's mysterious disappearance after he left the show. Frank's health got worse. He felt betrayed and forgotten by people he used to call friends. He slowly shut himself off from people, stopped answering messages, and rarely left his house. His weight fluctuated, his health got worse, and then all of a sudden he had a stroke. A neighbor who hadn't seen him in a few days found him unconscious in his home in Davenport, Iowa. He was rushed straight to the intensive care unit ICU. At first, the story of a middle-aged man who was critically ill after years of illness, stress, and loneliness was seen as a sad one. But then the truth came out. Frank had tested positive for fentanyl, and not just a trace amount. He had tested positive for a lethal dose. This drug can stop a person's breathing, paralyze their nervous system, and kill them within minutes. But Frank had never been known to use street drugs. He had been living alone during how did fentanyl get into his body? That question wasn't answered until after Frank's death, when the coroner's office re-examined all the blood samples and toxicology reports to make sure nothing was missed. The shocking conclusion was that Frank had been exposed to a synthetic form of fentanyl, 40 times stronger than heroin. It wasn't prescribed, it wasn't in any of his medical records, and it wasn't in any of his prescriptions. Frank's family and friends said that he had always been afraid of needles. Even the flu shot would make him nervous, and that he only took medicine when it was absolutely necessary. He never did anything that required an injection, so the idea that Frank would have injected himself with a lethal dose of opioids was unthinkable to those who loved him. Then there was the shocking detail of a small, almost invisible wound on Frank's upper thigh. From that point on, it wasn't an accident, it was a murder. After a thorough investigation of Frank's home, Mike Wolfe was arrested without a fuss, avoiding the media as he faced charges of first-degree murder and attempted evidence tampering. His face, which had been loved across the country, now looked tired and hurt. The smile that had been so familiar had faded, leaving deeper lines around his eyes and a look of loss in his eyes. Mike vehemently denied all charges. In the first trial, he pleaded not guilty, saying that the evidence was only circumstantial. But the final verdict would be given in court, where the truth would be revealed without mercy. When Frank died and the truth about Sentinel came to light, a historic trial began that put Mike Wolfe, who used to be the star of a national TV show, on trial. Prosecutors relied heavily on haunting evidence during the trial, saying that Wolfe's need for control was not just a habit, but had become, and Frank was no longer a trusted partner. Instead, she was an issue that got in the way of his plans to fully control the empire he so badly wanted to own. A clinical psychologist called by the prosecution gave a detailed analysis of Wolfe's behavior based on interviews and recorded testimony. He said Wolfe showed typical signs of narcissistic personality disorder, such as arrogance, lack of empathy, obsession with control, and an unquenchable need to be no matter what. The courtroom was silent as a chilling recording of Mike's voice played. In it, he talked about Frank as a burden in a private meeting. In an email to his business partner, Mike wrote, "When all of this is mine, we can finally scale without any obstacles." It was clear that he wasn't talking about the show, but about Frank. The prosecution charged Wolfe with murder and made the case seem like a business decision. The courtroom was the first step in a long line of actions meant to remove anything that stood in his way of dominance. The smile that had made him famous across the country and earned him million-dollar contracts disappeared. Mike Wolfe was shown his every secret thought, deliberate move, and cruel ambition. Detectives got involved just 3 weeks after Frank's death, and Wolfe had quietly filed legal papers to control his image and signature at the same time. A request was made through Frank's lawyer to take him off of the antique archaeology business, which only raised more questions. Then there was the autopsy report, which showed a small needle-like wound on Frank's upper thigh, which was a strange location that made suicide very unlikely. The fentanyl levels in his system were high enough to kill someone, and it was clear that the dose had been given on purpose, not by accident. Mike Wolfe sat there in silence. In court, more and more evidence was presented, including truck video footage, digital records, witness statements, financial motives, the police investigation's conclusions, and most importantly, Mike Wolfe's silence. No rebuttal, no emotion, no anger since Frank's death. He was charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 1 count of illegally using the digital identity of a deceased person. He was held without bail while his lawyer made his first statement. Mr. Wolfe loved Frank like a brother and is very sad about his death. He is fully cooperating with the investigation, and we believe that the truth will come out in the end. At the trial, the jury learned that Mike Wolfe had started planning to take full control of the American Picker brand in the year before Frank's death. He had quietly restructured his businesses, renegotiated contracts with the History Channel to get Frank off the show, and filed for preferential control over the American Picker brand. Wall's lawyers said that the decisions they made about revenue and distribution after Frank quit the show because of health problems were good business moves. But an email from 6 weeks before Frank's stroke showed a different picture. In a letter sent to him, Wall's partners said that once the burden was lifted, they could clearly grow without delay or looking back. Another email shown in court showed plans to start a new independent brand called Mike Wolfe, with the launch date was only 3 weeks after Frank's death. These details made it clear to the jury what Wolfe's real motivation was. For example, location data showed that Wolfe's custom black Mercedes Sprinter van was near Frank's house from 1:36 a.m. to 1:46 a.m. on the night of the incident, a mere 10 minutes. The prosecution said that Wolfe killed Frank by injecting him with fentanyl. Emotions were running high when they called Frank's sister Marianne Fritz to the stand. In a soft but firm voice, she talked about how devastated Frank was to be kicked off the show and how his physical and mental health had been in terrible shape. He often told her that Mike didn't care, that his longtime partner just wanted him out of his life. The next shocking thing was when the defense showed a handwritten letter found on Frank's desk in which Frank said he was afraid Mike was watching him and that if anything happened, it wouldn't be an accident. Elaine was the next witness. Temple really quieted down the courtroom when Frank's neighbor, Elaine, took the stand. She looked tense as she talked about how she couldn't sleep the night of the incident, and how when she looked out her window, she saw a truck she recognized from a TV show. A man got out of the truck and quietly walked to Frank's side door. He didn't knock, just stood there for a moment before going around to the back of the house. When shown a lineup photo, Elaine pointed to Mike Wolfe and said she thought it was him, but she wasn't sure because the man moved. The defense tried to discredit Elaine's testimony by asking about the lighting that night and how reliable her memory was, but the damage had already been done. The pieces were slowly coming together to paint a chillingly grim picture. The most emotional moment for the defense was when Mike Wolfe took the stand. His lawyer admitted it was a risky choice, but Mike was determined to go through with it. He slowly walked up to the witness stand. At first, Mike's voice shook, but he soon calmed down. "We were like brothers," he said. "We built something special together, but things got complicated. Fame changes people and money messes up relationships. I might not have handled things well, but I never meant to hurt Frank." He then said that the texts found on his personal phone were written when he was angry and stressed out at work. "I said things I regret, but that doesn't mean I swear I would never hurt Frank. I couldn't live with myself if I did." But these defenses didn't change the jury's mind. The evidence against Mike Wolfe was too strong and consistent. After weeks of arguments in a stuffy courtroom where time seemed to stand still, all eyes were on Mike Wolfe, the man who had once been a national TV star but was now standing still like a statue. A cold light fell on his pale face, and then the deep, authoritative voice of when the judge broke the tension in the courtroom and said, "Defendant Michael Wolfe is found guilty." Everyone let out a collective gasp. Every eye was on Mike Wolfe, waiting for a reaction, any sign of regret or anger, but he did not react. His eyes stayed open, staring blankly for what seemed like an eternity. Then he blinked slowly and heavily, as if trying to process an unbearable truth. Finally, he collapsed, showing complete helplessness as his knees buckled and his Mike Wolfe's huge body fell to the cold stone floor before anyone could do anything. The first horrified scream echoed through the courtroom as Wolfe lay motionless with his arms stretched out, his face down and his graying hair messy. In that moment, the courtroom froze as if time had stopped. Then chaos broke out with the screech of chairs, heavy footsteps, and panicked sounds filling the air. The medical team rushed in, kneeling next to Wolfe and starting chest compressions, doing everything they could to save the man who had just been found guilty. As worried questions rang out, an oxygen mask was quickly put over his pale face. "Where's the pulse? What's the blood pressure? Call an ambulance?" But in the midst of the chaos, a cruel truth slowly became clear. The man who had once stood for the discovery and revival of lost treasures, the one who had built a TV empire from piles of old junk, was now nothing more than a tragic relic and a living example of how greed and cruelty can destroy lives. Mike Wolfe died in the courtroom just as the verdict was read. The shocking news of Mike's death spread like wildfire, leaving people all over the world wondering how a story that was once just a rumor could turn into such a brutal truth. How could a beloved TV show end in betrayal? And a haunting death like this, Mike's death wasn't just the end of a man, it was also the end of the public's view of a beloved icon. He became a tragic example of the terrible price of fame, money, and power when pushed to the limit. The killer wasn't a stranger, but the victim's best friend, someone who had been through everything with him and called him a brother. Mike's sudden death at the place where justice was done left a heavy echoes and many unanswered questions. He died just as the truth was revealed, as if the verdict were the final blow to the moment time seemed to stop. Man who had once stood for the journey to find lost treasures was now a relic of Frank Fritz, and Mike Wolfe's story is not only a tragedy about a broken friendship, but also a lesson about ambition, betrayal, and the price of fame. Behind every glamorous story on TV, there are dark corners that no one sees, and sometimes the truth is even worse than we could have imagined. Mike Wolfe, who was the star of a beloved TV show, has now become a symbol of the fallout from blind ambition and bad decisions, as his death happened just as the truth came out. The light not only marked the end of a life, but also a chapter in a long story that millions of people loved. Even though the truth may be harsh, we will never forget what happened or the important lessons it taught us. Sometimes the truth isn't just an ending, it's a beginning for new stories, new discoveries, and questions that may never have full answers. Thank you for traveling with us, and remember that what we know is just the tip of the iceberg.